Well, hi everyone again, and welcome to the latest talk in our series on the book of Hebrews. I really hope it's going well for you so far. Now, I wonder if you've ever heard a motivational speaker doing his or her thing. These are very popular amongst big companies who are prepared to pay big bucks to get someone in for an evening to speak to their employees and really get underneath their skin and fire them up to a new level of performance. But these guys don't come cheap. So to get someone like Sir Clive Woodward, for example, there he is. He's actually England's World Cup winning rugby coach. To get him along for an evening would cost around the region of between £20,000 to £30,000. I think I'd rather have Grantley Watkins myself. But what you get for your money is a workforce that is fired up with a we can do it mentality. And companies are prepared to pay big time for that. Now, we're studying Hebrews at the moment, and last time we had the equivalent of a motivational speech ourselves. The Jewish Christians who are threatened with severe persecution and attempted to walk away from Jesus and return to the Judaism of the synagogues are in need of some positive motivation to keep believing and to keep exercising true faith in Jesus. I've had plenty of negative motivation so far. Guys, if you jump off the gospel train, then you're putting yourself in terrible danger, we've been reading. But now it's time for some more positive motivation. So we saw last time how in chapter 11, the writer bombards his readers with a magnificent roll call of honour of the many, many heroes of faith who believed God and exercised real faith in him, even under the most desperate of circumstances. Take Moses, for example. So we can imagine him fleeing from Egypt, fleeing from slavery. He's at the head of the nation. He's leading them out of Egypt. And then suddenly he hits the dead end of the Red Sea, stretching right across them. And there's no obvious way across. And furthermore, they can hear the thundering of hooves of the Egyptian army right behind them. It sounds like it's the end of the road for them. So let's have a look at Exodus chapter 14, verses 13 to 14, and just be in awe of Moses' leadership here. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring to you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Well, this is mighty faith, isn't it? So Moses and the deliverance that he led through the Red Sea gets a mention in Hebrews chapter 11, along with many other Old Testament examples of people who believed God and proved God. It's just one of the great chapters in our Bible. And it's designed to be motivational. It's saying to the Jewish Christians then, and it's saying to us now, that you can do this too. That we can exercise faith in God under trying circumstances when we feel trapped as well. So today we're going to move on to Hebrews 12. And we're just going to look at the first 13 verses in this talk. And as always, if you haven't read the passage yet, then can I encourage you just to pause the video right now, grab yourself a Bible and read these 13 verses before we carry on. Okay then, well, the first word in today's passage is an important one. It's the word therefore. And it's a word that links chapter 12 back to chapter 11. So having fired us up with the heroes of faith in chapter 11, now comes the application. Since we are surrounded by all these wonderful examples of faith in action, it's saying, let's therefore rise up let's take the baton from these guys and let's run a race ourselves. And in fact, the illustration of a race to be run is where the writer goes next. Now we're going to concentrate today on the picture in our passage of an athlete running a race. And we're going to look in detail at the first 2 verses. We'll also cover the next 11 verses, perhaps not in such great detail though. So here's our first heading. We're all running a race. We're all running a race. Now it's possible that some of you watching this may, perhaps without even realising it, think about living life as a Christian in rather static terms. I mean, you may say, well, this is my story. Once I wasn't a Christian, then I got saved and I became a Christian. My sins were forgiven. I'm part of a lively church now. And this is definitely a new kind of life that I'm living. Well, that's lovely. But the Bible describes your Christian life in far more dynamic terms than that. And sometimes your walk with God is described as that, as a walk. So here's an example from Galatians 5, verse 1. So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Now, walking isn't a static thing. It means that you're moving. It means that you don't stay where you are as a new Christian. You move on. You develop and mature. You're actually going somewhere. Okay, well that's good. That's better. But the idea of going for a walk can imply an activity that's actually quite easy for us. Sounds even a little bit casual. So, to keep us on our toes, the Bible also talks about the Christian life in terms of running. Now that's not so casual, is it? And we're not talking here about a short sprint that could be done in under a minute and then the race is over. No, it's a marathon in which we're to keep running every day for the rest of our lives. The race we're in only finishes when we die, or when Jesus returns again, whichever comes first. Now, someone who knew that he was coming to the end of his race was the Apostle Paul. And in his very last letter before his death, he writes this to Timothy. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. He's saying, I've done it. I've completed the race. It's over for me now. And if you read on in 2 Timothy, you'll see that Paul is expecting the Lord to reward him with a wonderful prize for his faithful service, for finishing the race. Now, I need to say something again that you'll have heard before. The way we live our lives as Christians has eternal consequences. I've said many times in Hope Church now that Christian people can expect different levels of reward or not, according to how they've lived their Christian lives, how they've honoured God, how they've served God, how they've obeyed God. We're not all going to be treated the same. So if you mess around as a Christian, I'm afraid that you're going to regret it when you come before Jesus on that last day. This just needs to be said, I'm afraid, over and over again. So, we're running in a race as Christian people, and this implies urgency, it requires training, and if we're to win, we don't want any hindrances to our running. And if it's a race, we want to win it, and to win the prize, which for Paul was expected to be a crown of righteousness. Okay, well, let's unpack these first 2 verses a bit further and see what more Hebrews has to teach us about running the race. So here's our second heading. How do we run the race? And the first thing it says is, let's throw off everything that hinders. Now, I'm sure we've all seen athletes getting ready for a big race. They come onto the track, they've got their track suits on, but then they strip off everything except the very lightest, the very skimpiest running gear possible. Now, this is Katarina Johnson-Thompson. She's our world champion heptathlete, and she's almost wearing a bikini to compete in. But everything that could hinder, that might have slowed her down, had to be thrown off. So what could hinder us? Well, we're not talking about sin yet. That's coming up shortly. And Hebrews doesn't specify exactly what hindrances the writer has in mind. But elsewhere in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul has two ways in which a failure to embrace God's value system can be a big hindrance to us. And here's the first. It's legalism, by which I mean a kind of lifeless, keeping the rules form of religion that just stifles the life-transforming, joy-giving presence of the Holy Spirit in our lives. Please say you haven't come across much legalism in our church, please. But Paul did come across it in the churches in Galatia, and he wrote them a letter in which he comes across as spitting mad. These new churches had received the gospel and they were doing well until suddenly in come some people of influence wielding a rule book. Oh, right, you've just become Christians? Well, now, you've got to do this now. You've got to do that now. You've got to get circumcised. You've got to keep these special days. You've got to avoid eating certain foods. I mean, in our day, it might be, well, you can't drink any alcohol now. You can't go dancing. You can't do any shopping on a Sunday. And what's happening is that all this new life, the fun, the power and the joy of being a new Christian is just being squeezed out of you. And the focus has changed from how can I joyfully honour my Jesus with the way I live to how can I possibly tick all these religious boxes today? That's legalism. It's a deadly thing. So how did Paul try to snuff it out amongst the churches in Galatia? Well, as we've seen, he wrote them a letter in which he was mad. So this is chapter 3, verse 1. You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? He's ranting. I mean, this is strong language. Bewitched you. It reminds us of Jesus giving the legalistic Pharisees and teachers of the law the benefit of his view of them. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being sent to hell? That's Jesus speaking. Well, let's be clear about this. Legalistic religion masquerading as Christianity isn't just an alternative expression of our Christian faith. It's an absolute abomination to God. Hence the letter to the Galatians featuring in our Bibles and the rather hostile tone you'll find in it. So we've got to see legalism as a huge hindrance to us running the race well. Let me just finish my point here by taking you back to Galatians, chapter 5, verse 7. You were running well, Paul says. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? You're now running the race very badly, you Galatians, if indeed you're still running it at all. Be absolutely ruthless in getting rid of a culture of legalism from your church life. And we've got to be vigilant as well. But there's a second hindrance that you'll find in the New Testament. And it's the very opposite to legalism. And we'll give it the title license. And by this I mean an over-casual application of the doctrine of grace. Now, we love the biblical doctrine of grace, don't we? We sing loads of songs about it. It's a doctrine that stresses the free gift of salvation, that there's nothing we can do to earn our salvation, nothing we can do to make our God love us more or love us less for that matter. It stresses that we're now born again, we're changed people, and we're still changing as God's Spirit does his work inside us. That we're now slaves to righteousness. That's our natural tendency. We're now free not to sin. So this is just a wonderful doctrine. But there's always a danger that this doctrine can slip over to one of casual license. That it's all happened now. There's no further effort required from me to sustain my Christian life. I can do what I want. Well, I'm afraid nothing could be further from the truth. We're in a race, my friends. It's not a casual stroll. It's a race with Jesus as our pace setter running alongside. Now that's actually a good thing, isn't it? That means we're not isolated as Christian people, having to do it all by ourselves. Jesus is with us. And often he wants to stretch us so we grow as Christian people and our lives become more fruitful. So we've got to get ourselves into shape spiritually. Now, another British athletic hero of ours is Steve Redgrave. There he is. Now, Steve was, still is, a diabetic, suffers from diabetes, but he still won 5 gold medals rowing for Britain at successive Olympic Games, the last one being in Sydney in the year 2000, when he was 38 years of age. Now, I know I'm using an extreme example here, but this man engages in races and he's a winner. Now, here are a couple of Redgrave quotes to inspire us as Christians to run our race well. This is Redgrave. It's iron in the mind, not in the supplement, that wins races. Here's another one. Diabetes has got to learn to live with me, not me live with diabetes. Yeah. So here's a great guy, but we can only imagine the training, the effort, and crucially the discipline that's required to win his races. He had to throw off everything that hindered. He was single-minded, and that encourages us to be likewise. To free up time to read our Bibles, to learn more, to pray, to worship, to be together as Christians. It takes discipline to give our God exclusive chunks of time in our busy lives. Single-minded determination. Let's be inspired by Steve Redgrave. But what if you're committed to living life for God and we suddenly lose our discipline as believers? You know, we have a bad day or a bad week, perhaps even a bad year. Well, you could find that God imposes discipline on you. And this is what verses 4 to 11 are about in today's passage. The picture changes from an athlete going for a prize to a loving parent disciplining his children. But I guess athletes have trainers and they have to discipline their charges occasionally. So the Hebrews writer quotes from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 to 12. My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you. Because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son. Now, we haven't got time to study these verses in any detail, but let's note that discipline imposed on children is a sign of a parent's love. It would be a pretty poor mum or dad who didn't look to shape their children's behaviour using, I don't know, a naughty step or the withdrawal of privileges or whatever punishment you feel is appropriate. That's discipline. And God disciplines his children too, we read. And so what this means is that a period of hardship in your life doesn't necessarily mean that God is absent from you. I guess where I've known the Lord's discipline in the past is where I've got a bit too full of myself sometimes. You see, I've done an awful lot of Christian public speaking over the years, and occasionally I'm conscious that a particular session has gone well and has been fruitful. And sadly, my reaction to that has sometimes been to be just rather pleased with myself. Now, let me tell you that whenever that happens, without fail, I've been swiftly brought down to earth and reminded in no uncertain terms that any success is due to the presence of God's Holy Spirit in me. So celebrate success, yeah, be pleased, rejoice with those who rejoice, but never forget where the credit and the glory belongs. So that's my testimony of the Lord's discipline. So, where are we now? We've been throwing off things that could hinder us, particularly unhelpful attitudes, either of oppressive, choking legalism or a casual license that sees no need for effort or discipline in the Christian life. I wonder if there's anything like this hindering you right now. It needs to be thrown off, doesn't it? Right, moving on. The writer now urges us to throw off a second thing. So he now urges us to throw off the sin that so easily entangles. Now let's have a look at this phrase. Those in our church have been reminded many a time that as born-again Christians, they're no longer to see themselves as sinners, but as saints, because that's how the Bible defines you. But does that mean that you're finished with sin in your life? Well, you're running a race, and verse 1 is telling us that sin is not just capable of entangling you, it can easily entangle you, and can in fact so easily entangle you. Have a read of that verse again. So it's possible to make a complete shipwreck of your faith, as did Hymenaeus and Alexander. These are people Paul knew about. He wrote to Timothy in the first letter, chapter 1, verses 19 to 20. It sounds like these two guys both jumped off the gospel train, to use the illustration of a few talks ago. Sounds like they're both out of the race, doesn't it? So, what should you do as a race runner when you find that sin is crouching at your door? Answer equals, get hold of some of Steve Redgrave's single-mindedness and be ruthless. This is Colossians chapter 3, verse 8. And now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Well, direct talk, isn't it, from God's word? And none of us can misunderstand what that verse is saying. So the message so far is this. Christian person, you're in a race, you want to complete it, you want to win it, and you want to give yourself every chance to do so. So get rid of anything that would hinder or entangle you. And as I said, if there's anything that would hinder you, or if there's any sin that would entangle you, it needs to be thrown off. We're in a race. Now, there's one final point I want to make from today's Hebrews passage. Here's the third heading. We look to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Now, I'm sure you've all seen 100-metre runners in action. Now, my question is this. Where are they looking during the race? Are they looking up at the stands to see if mum or dad is watching? Or are they perhaps looking across at their competitors to see how they're doing? Perhaps they're looking down even at their boot laces to make sure their laces are still tied up. No, you won't find any of that. what you'll find is that they're looking straight ahead at the finish line. Just look at this picture. Now here's where the illustrations can get a bit confusing, because we know that in a very real sense, Jesus is running alongside us in the race. His Spirit is in us. But we also look forward to the finish line at the end of the race, and there, at the finish line, urging us on to finish well is Jesus. We'll be with him once our race is run. And as we run as fast as we can, we're encouraged in this verse to think of Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. We're encouraged to think of him whom God did not spare, handed over to brutal Roman soldiers, all professional killers, to be crucified. We think of him who voluntarily entered into the pain and shame of it all for us. We think of the brutal whipping, the crown of thorns, the physical agony, the spiritual agony, all for us. And then we get this amazing verse in Hebrews. We're talking about Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. I wonder if you can see it in this verse. Jesus despised the shame, the humiliation of the cross. He ignored it. He set it aside as being a nothing thing, because in the middle of this black day, he could see something ahead that gave him only the most wonderful joy. There was a prize waiting him at the end of all this. I wonder if you know what that prize was. You could shout it at the screen now if you want. His prize was a glorious bride. After the cry, "It is finished," millions, even billions of believers can now be reconciled to God, worshipping him and glorifying him, joining with him one day on a new earth, so that he can now enjoy the company of his bride forever. And the thought of that brought Jesus great joy. But first, the cross had to be endured. Okay, we're coming to a conclusion now. So I want to start this conclusion just by thinking about those of us who are running the race, the Jesus race, right now. We've taken the baton from the previous generation of believers, and now it's our turn to run. And there ahead, on the finishing line, is our Jesus, desperate for us to join the new community of his bride. So we just keep on running day after day, getting rid of whatever would hinder or entangle us, spurred on by our thoughts about our Jesus enduring the cross, scorning its shame, for the joy of being with us one day at the marriage supper of the Lamb, when the race is over and done. And you Jewish Christians of AD 67, to whom the letter of Hebrews was originally written, you make sure you stay in the race. And just think that whatever persecution may lie ahead of you, for you, it's nothing compared to what our Jesus suffered for you. Well, the end of today's passage finishes with this verse, and with this I'm going to finish. This is Hebrews chapter 12, verse 12. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees, and get running. Well, next time we're going to be finishing Hebrews chapter 12, when the writer is going to continue to motivate his readers in a positive way. We'll find out how next time. So thanks for listening, everyone, and may God bless you all.
Thank you for tuning in. We hope you have enjoyed today's teaching and that it is a blessing to you. If you have any questions, please contact us via Facebook Messenger or email us at office@hopechurchthetford.org. We will be glad to hear from you and will endeavour to get back to you as soon as possible. Tune in again next week. We are currently meeting in person on Friday nights. If you'd like to attend one of our services, please let us know and we will send you the link of where you can book in. Have a blessed week.